You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to a First Contact special where we are going to talk about our reactions to Star Trek Picard, the cast, the trailer, and what's going on. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
So, James, the creator of the show and holder of the Star Trek crown right now, Alex Kurtzman, has described what kind of show this is going to be. Can you just run through that for me?
The mandate was to make it a more psychological show, a character study about this man in his emeritus years. There are so few shows that allow a significantly older protagonist to be the driver. It'll be very different than Discovery. Thank Christ. It'll be slower, more meditative. It speaks to the rainbow of colours we're playing with in all these different shows. He is lying.
That sounds like he's doing the quote from Father Ted with Father Noel going, "It was very, very long and very, very dull. It was my kind of film."
And actually, that's sort of what you want. And when that first teaser trailer came out with just the vineyard and that little stroll around, and you're just like, oh, this goes right back to All Good Things. It's almost like we're ignoring the movies and we're going back to this place, this retired man, this voiceover, how he's been let down, and you think, oh, maybe it is. I got sucked right in. It's like, maybe it is the psychological show.
"15 years ago, today, you led us out of the darkness. You commanded the greatest rescue armada in history. Then, the unimaginable. What did that cost you?"
And then, not long after, actually, you get the full trailer and it's like, bong, Borg, bong, Data, bong, she is the chosen one, 7 of 9.
Sometimes I worry that you have forgotten who you are. We do not.
You can't do it alone. You need help. You need protection. You need a crew. Be the captain they remember. She has no idea what she truly is.
She's the end of all. She's the destroyer.
Oh my god, it's all the things, and you're like, this is not a quite psychological show, is it?
Are you not excited? 7 of 9!
Here's a thing you know, isn't it?
Data! Data's back!
Looking weird.
He looks like Brent Spiner was a corpse thrown into a river, but doesn't matter, Data's back, and B4 is in a drawer. I don't know why. B4's back!
I find this really weird as well, because none of this was out. Not like there had been sort of reports on really dodgy sites that you wouldn't trust as a source for anything that Brent Spiner was back, and obviously he'd cancelled appearances and other things, and I'd wildly speculated that he'd definitely be in it because this is kind of what they do. But none of this was announced. None of this was out in the open. All these people had kept it secret and kept it hidden, and then it's just like they just come out and tell us. And I was just, well, wouldn't it have been nice actually? Like, if you could have surprised us with either Data or 7 of 9, these iconic characters from that era of Star Trek. But no, they're just blowing it all over your face. It's like, yeah, we got to get the money shot now. It feels a bit desperate, and I'm sort of I'm very disappointed in everyone, but not surprised.
And all the while, Michael Dorn sits by the phone, a copy of Captain Worf sat on his lap, going, any moment now, it'll ring.
Okay, for on that, do you genuinely think that's the last announcement? Because they've said that Riker and Troy will be in it. Robert Picardo's apparently in negotiations for season 2.
When didn't Frakes have a photo of him and Will Wheaton on set the other day?
Well, I think that was at a convention, but you know,
Was it? Okay.
I wouldn't put it past them. But yeah, there's going to be at least one other. They've not put all this out 6 months ahead of time, have they? They've not blown their full load. They've just some of it. There's a second load to come. I wish I'd started somewhere different there.
Oh God! Imagine when that horse turns up. It's going to be a special moment for us all.
Well, he's got a dog. He's got a dog called Number One, which is just immediately makes me go, nope, move on.
I do get the sense that it's going to get out of that setting very, very quickly, which is a shame because I feel like there's some good stuff to be explored in essentially having Picard living on a vineyard and just having a sort of Star Trek version of Keith Floyd on the piss.
It will be about 3 or 4 minutes into the episode where this probably Borg lady will turn up and she is the magic chosen one because she is. And then it will all turn to shit. And it's going to be terrible.
Is it worth discussing Discovery at this point? just in loose terms. And I think it's probably also worth saying that this was a subject that we had previously meant to discuss on this podcast before in an extended episode, and the fact that we didn't is probably quite telling.
We're not fans of Discovery. In its own absolutely mental way, there are bits of season 2 I quite like. I thought season 1 was just a car crash.
Apart from one episode. There was one episode of season 1 that was fantastic.
The time loop episode, which is like
Yeah.
standalone. It was a budget episode done at last minute. That classic Star Trek thing, limit the resources and you get interesting. It's like 24 but dumber, but having that pretense of it being very adult. And it's so frustrating because it thinks it's high quality, but the writing is just so bad. And all the setup, and then the payoff was like, we're bored of that now, let's move on. It's like, oh, we're doing a Klingon war season. Okay, Deep Space Nine's war seasons, 6, season 5, towards the end of Deep Space Nine are really good, and they explore it, and everyone gets broken and sad, but it was just like, we're doing a war. Oh no, we're bored of the war. We've gone off to the Mirror Universe for a John. Oh, the war's over. And it's, what? Oh, okay. And season 2, I love Anson Mount. I want to spend time in that captain's company. He is just such a good actor, and he elevates everyone. But the rest of it, like the first 3 episodes, I was like, oh, this is Star Trek. Oh, there's disaster, there's a mystery. Oh, there's a planet, there's humans on it, they've evolved differently, they've got different belief systems, and oh, we've discovered a sphere, it's got lots of knowledge on it, it wants to survive, that's interesting. And then it's like, oh no, we're back to being absolutely bonkers, but not in an enjoyable way. And it's just, all this stuff happens, and then it's like, we'll solve the 7 signals in the last episode, and then we'll bugger off to the future, we'll hint at the Borg, we'll do all sorts of stuff, and it's just like, I have a headache watching it.
It was highly frustrating because you're right, there were those times when you went, oh wow, all the problems we had with the first series, they've absolutely been addressed here. The characters are likeable across the board. They're all likeable. And that was a problem in series 1, was that about half of them you liked, half of them you just... Every time they walked on screen, you just went, ugh. And they fixed that. And you're right, I would say there's a very noticeable shift on that episode. Is it about halfway through where they're really asking of each of you to absolutely care fundamentally about a background character who they've spent no time in setting up.
You have this bridge crew which do nothing and you don't get to know them. You could have had one scene with them because you're not restricted by episode length. Some are 38 minutes, others are like 60. So it feels very ill-disciplined to me. I like Star Trek. I like 45 minutes. I like writing to a length. I like structure. And it doesn't have any structure. And it's not like it has this continuing narrative, because you can structure that as well. It has no sense of pacing. And they know about Star Trek because you have an episode that is literally a sequel to The Cage. Why? Why is this a sequel to The Cage? Why is this here? Who cares? Who watching this cares about that? It doesn't actually have any impact. It's just, we've gone to this planet, we've met these aliens, we've brought back Vina. Does it fit into the overall arc, or is it just, wouldn't it be cool if? And there's a lot of that.
I felt like I was a lot more positive towards it than you were, and I'm not massively so. But I did feel that when you reach the penultimate episode, there's still a chance to end on a high note here if you can bring it all back together. And I felt it fumbled it at the end, and some of the other stuff that would have been elevated as a result just wasn't, and it ended with a slightly sour note, unfortunately, because of that. And I think that they hadn't necessarily helped that with, for example, some of the short treks that they put out, like Calypso suggesting certain directions that we then didn't go down. I felt like some people must have felt when they were watching season 3 of Twin Peaks, where you get to the penultimate episode and everyone's feeling good, and then there's the last episode, which I quite liked, but most people hated.
I loved it.
Yeah, I loved it as well. but not the last episode of Discovery. And actually, going back to what you were saying, there was one thing we were saying about fixing problems from Series 1 and Series 2. There was one thing that they didn't fix, and that's something that you've addressed there, which is a reliance on the past. And it's an odd tightrope to have to walk, because the problem is, on one hand, you absolutely, especially with the streaming service, you want to be able to bring in the fans and get the fans in, put in a bit of fan service to keep them happy. God knows it's a fine line that something like Doctor Who has to walk all the time. However, in doing it, they often, more in Series 1 than Series 2, but Series 2 is absolutely still guilty of it, were putting in stuff that, unless you were quite familiar with a long span of the show, was impenetrable to a casual audience.
But the problem is they do all that, and they do all the introducing past elements or future elements because they panicked and were worried about the Orville being received better than Star Trek Discovery. But they introduce elements which just don't work, like Section 31, where they don't understand what Section 31 is. It's established in the prequel Star Trek Enterprise, and it's fleshed out in Deep Space Nine, and then you've got this thing in between which contradicts both of them, because they just think that Section 31 is a super cool spy agency, I think.
Yeah, they think it's Starfleet Intelligence, which also exists. But and then there's that Klingon episode, which is, I think, the worst hour of Star Trek since Shades of Grey. It was so lavish and pretty looking. Everyone was like, "Oh, it's like Game of Thrones in space."
Do they at least? And I should point out, I stopped watching Discovery after 4 episodes. Do they at least stop having the Klingons speaking Klingon with English subtitles?
Ish. And that was one of my big complaints. That whole thing of Game of Thrones in space, it felt so in debt of Game of Thrones. And I just didn't care. That was not a good move. It was quite alienating, and it assumed, hey, everyone loves Game of Thrones. Well, actually, no.
No.
And it really didn't work. It wasn't nice. And I suppose, as much as I can watch the trailer for Picard, and even as a not as experienced fan, there's plenty in that makes me go, oh yeah, no, I'm intrigued. Discovery leaves me with my concerns about bringing back past elements, and God knows there's a few in that trailer.
Well, I did think to myself, I'm incredibly cynical, if you were not aware. I'm very, very cynical, and that is firmly Star Trek Discovery and the reboot films' fault for that. It's Alex Kurtzman's fault. His fault. He's got the blame for that. But I did think, okay, I'll rewatch the trailer and I'll throw off that cynicism. What if this trailer was in 2009? How would I feel about it then? If this was the new Star Trek show that was following Enterprise? And I would have been a little bit excited about the returning characters, but for the most part, it's just not really interesting. I don't want to see Picard in this story about the Chosen One fighting the Borg.
Yeah, I mean, when that element came up in the trailer, like that, the whole psychological thing obviously is is nonsense. But I was excited when Michael Chabon was announced as showrunner, because he wrote Calypso, which we mentioned, which is the best of the Star Trek shorts.
Well, is he the showrunner?
Yes.
Because it was originally announced Alex Kurtzman was the showrunner.
Kurtzman's kind of stepping back as more of a strategy guy, and Michelle Paradise is running Discovery, and Michael Chabon, after a certain point, is running Picard.
So it started out with Alex Kurtzman then?
Oh yeah, like he's creator, and he will set the tone.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know how the credits will break down, but a lot of the people working on Discovery were also developing Picard at the same time, as far as I can understand it.
And I'm sure there'll be some ties between the two. I don't doubt for a second that some stuff that's been set up in Discovery will in some way therefore play out in Picard. Even just if it's a dropped line.
Oh, a line maybe, but I think beyond a line they will not have any links between the shows, particularly with the amount of Star Trek shows that are going to be coming out.
See, the way that Series 2 went, where it seemed to so explicitly be suggesting the Borg, and then never actually saying it was the Borg, and then the fact that this revolves around the Borg, I'm kind of thinking they might be tied together.
The reason this revolves around the Borg is because if you're going to bring back Picard, there's two avenues of storytelling: Romulans or the Borg.
Oh no, absolutely. I don't disagree. But it makes me think, therefore, the fact it was in Discovery, because I also don't doubt that Picard was something that they had been planning for a little while, even if it was like a thought in mind. Certainly, probably before they started scripting Series 2 of Discovery.
But did they even have time to plan on Discovery? Because it went through about 5 showrunners, didn't it, season 2?
So there's the other thing, is that element in Discovery only comes in about halfway through Series 2.
Right.
So the fact that jumps in about halfway through does kind of make me think, that feels like a setup. Could be entirely wrong. I mean, this is the thing. We often talk, not so much on First Contact, but certainly on our other podcast where we're talking about Red Dwarf, we often talk about how Red Dwarf has very bad trailers. And it's entirely possible to edit a trailer to make something look entirely different. And that is entirely possible here. However, it's a limited series. And if you're doing a limited series, then generally I would say you probably are working towards the sort of plot that they seem to be going for here. But I don't feel yet that we can say with absolute certainty that it's necessarily representative.
Do you know what I found interesting about the Star Trek Picard trailer? Is we looked at all the exciting things in it. 7 of 9, Data, the Captain Picard Day banner. Yes, by the way, Alex, that Captain Picard Day banner, that is from an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. And then we saw it announced Riker and Troy are going to be in it, and then Hugh is going to be in it. By the way, Alex, Hugh is from a Star Trek The Next Generation episode.
I get a feeling we're getting a lot of this in the future.
And we look at all those elements and we think, wow, it's really exciting. Are we excited about any of the new elements? No.
Well, see, this is where the different perspectives also come in, because I feel that perhaps I'm in a position to be more amenable to this than you two are, because as much time as we spend with TNG working through it, currently we're deep in Series 4, as anyone following the podcast knows. But it means that I don't necessarily have an issue if they want to take that tonal shift, and essentially it's kind of what they've done before with the Kelvin timeline films, I guess. I'm not averse to them doing that with Picard. I just don't want it to turn out like Nemesis. Well,
here's the thing about that. So that was the show with the most kind of cast input. You would say the Brent Spiner has a story credit. I know that Patrick Stewart was heavily consulted. Various quotes from the writer say anytime they went down to the studio floor, they were pulled aside and he wanted more women and more action.
I mean, just like having Jean back.
But you know that... I know the cast bring a lot of value and they know the characters a lot. But, you know, Brent Spiner told Michael Piller during Insurrection he didn't know how to write Data. The man who had basically made Data who he was throughout the series. So they have egos and they want certain things. And I think the movies, Picard is an unrecognisable character for the most part. You get Generations, obviously, that's a grieving Picard because you have to have the theme of mortality in there. You get First Contact where he's vengeful Picard, which I don't think necessarily ever comes across, but you sort of go, alright, you know, that didn't happen any other time he encountered the Borg, but...
It stretches the character, but it just stays enough that you know, we still see Picard.
Well, here's where I think you can maybe take some promise from the show, which is that on that film, as you were saying, you have the different actors having the different things that they want. I very much assume that on this show, the only actor that's going to have any weight in terms of story or anything like that is going to be Patrick Stewart. So if you're more on board with Picard than what they did with any of the other characters, June buggies aside, then that's probably a good thing going into this. It depends on how much you feel that his vision of the character aligns with what yours is.
Just before we recorded this podcast, I did rewatch the trailer, and that is one thing that I did think watching it. They're kind of trying to fix Nemesis a little bit. They're adding more of an emotional depth to it. And that's nice, because even though I do like Nemesis, I'm not one of the people who will, you know, slag off that film mercilessly, even if it is just a rehash of Insurrection with a Dune buggy. But it does seem to be fixing the problems that were left with the characters. You know, bringing back Data, getting rid of B4, and hopefully ending them on a happy ending. Hopefully it doesn't end with a giant supernova destroying all the Borg with Picard at the centre of it.
Well, so have you guys read Star Trek Countdown, the prequel to Star Trek 2009? Now, that was said at the time, oh, this is canon. This is definitely what happens. And in the future, Data is back anyway. He's taken over the mind of B4. And if you go on Memory Beta, there's all sorts of convoluted explanations about it and short stories that have been written, you know, about, oh, Data didn't want to take his brother's life and wrote a program to delete himself and all that kind of stuff. But eventually he came back and he was captain of an Enterprise at some point in the future. I imagine that's being sort of flushed down the toilet, even though it was written by Alex Kurtzman. But what they are keeping is the destruction of Romulus, which obviously plays into Star Trek 2009 and creating the Kelvin timeline. So all that sort of stuff plays out. And as far as I can tell, just watching that trailer, I think the Data at the end is a hologram. You know, I think it is that poker game from Star Trek The Next Generation. Picard is playing poker with Data, and he seems to have the sort of Nemesis uniform on. And I imagine the one in the box will come into play in later episodes, and Data will come back. But I imagine in the early episodes, it's just a sort of, you know, he's using him as a sounding board.
Absolutely. In narrative terms, Data is dead wife.
Yeah.
You know the way that you would have any other story, someone speaking to the vision of their dead wife. Same thing. Just it's going to be with the holodeck. I don't doubt for a second that's what it's going to be, and that's exactly what I was saying with the other actors who, once upon a time, were this not Picard, were this a new series of Next Gen, would have some sway. Don't imagine that Brent Spiner is going to have any sway. I certainly don't imagine that Jonathan Frakes, outside of his directing chair, is going to have any sway about his character. And should Michael Dorn actually get that phone call, I don't imagine he's going to have any sway whatsoever.
They're going to bring back Worf, aren't they?
I think if you look at them bringing back Doctor Who, back when Russell T Davies brought it back in 2005, how restrained they were. You know, they didn't use the word Gallifrey. They didn't visit the Time Lords. There's a man, he travels in a box. And that was sort of all you needed, is that basic setup. And when you watch Discovery, it's like, oh, Spock's sister, we're going to meet Spock. And then it's like, Spock, the Enterprise, the theme tune, everything. Zero restraint. And here, it's just like Picard. And you think, okay, can we do a sort of just a Picard kind of solo thing? It's just very much isolated. You know, because this only is happening because Logan was a big hit, I think. Can we do that Journey's End with this character? He used to be in Star Trek. We can definitely do something with him. But it's the lack of restraint. It's like, well, if you bring back Picard, you've got to bring back Data. Oh, you've got to bring back all these other characters. And it's like, what was big in Star Trek in the 90s? And eventually you reach Seven of Nine. And I want to talk about her a bit more.
But before you do, I think it is worth saying that all those things, yeah, I'm sure, as you are, as well as the things we've seen, there will be more returning elements. However, I do believe that we're going to see a very similar syndrome to what we saw with, and are seeing, with the Star Wars sequels, which is that a lot of people are, from trailers, going to be putting a lot of stock in these elements returning, and they're going, yeah, it's going to be great, and we're going to see Seven of Nine. She's going to be all through the series, and we're going to see Troy and Riker back, and Data's going to be in all the episodes, and he's going to be doing comedy bits, and it's going to be great. And I bet you all of these things barely in it.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think there's every element that there's going to be a bit of a backlash to that, in the same way the Star Wars sequels do, because people have mistakenly put their stock in these returning elements, and they want to see more of that thing, forgetting the fact that you're trying to move forwards and do something new, and if you concentrate entirely on the previous thing, you don't allow the new thing room to breathe. Which I realise that this is revolving around an old character, so it's one half a dozen of another, but there's only one character, everyone else is new. I don't think it's going to focus too much on those old elements.
Then why does the trailer focus so much on them?
To get people talking. It's the Star Wars things. The Star Wars trailers do exactly the same.
And that's why people get angry, because they've been misled.
Well, that's the thing. That's trailers for you, isn't it? But it seems obvious to me that that's what's going to happen, especially because what's the length of the series? Is it 10 episodes?
10 episodes, yeah.
10. There's absolutely no way that it's going to have more than passing time for these people.
I think you're right in some ways. I think Riker will be very much cameo fodder. I think that Data will start off as cameos and will probably in the finale become a full-fledged character. I think Seven of Nine is going to recur because basically they've said that. So that's fine. And I think Hugh as well is probably part of a bigger kind of plot.
I imagine Hugh is part of the story, because what's the point in bringing him back if he's not going to be an integral part of it? Hugh isn't a character who everyone goes, what? Hugh is back? It's like saying Spot is back? They're bringing back Spot?
Most people have no idea who Hugh is. It's a very weird one, isn't it? It's just, if it was John Delancey, you'd go, alright, fine, yeah, Q. Everyone knows Q. This Borg, there was a guest star in 3 episodes, and you're just like, okay. It does show they know the show, and they are interested in the show. Maybe bring your own ideas. Maybe do something different.
So this is where my concern of the series comes in, and it may be slightly different to the concerns of you two, where you're concerned about it respecting the past to some degree at least. My concern is accessibility, and again, going back to Discovery, that was my great complaint with Discovery, was that I get that people want it to have elements of the past, and I get you want it to tie in to old stories and expand on points. I absolutely understand that. However, you can only move towards entropy when you do that with a series. You have to have something that allows people to come on board, otherwise the audience will just continue to shrink.
And you know what? I couldn't care less. I couldn't get, because my all-time favourite season of Star Trek is Enterprise's last season, which is the season where they went, people are stopping, people are turning off, let's just make it a season for the fans. This is probably going to be our last season. And it was incredible, and it was all loads of references to the past, and it was all, prequel to this original series story, prequel to this Next Generation story, and it was brilliant.
However, I feel like that's earned a little bit, because the work has been put in the previous 2 series to mean that more casual viewers can endure episodes where they can't necessarily follow what's going on because they are invested in the programme through the characters from what's gone before. When you do a Discovery, though, and you go in hard from the start, and let's be honest about it, Discovery is pretty hard based in, or tries to be, tying into things. And, this thing, look, it's a sequel to The Cage, all of this. But on the platform it's on, and done the way it is done, it should be accessible to new viewers. It absolutely should be. And quite often it's not.
You see, I felt
that is my slight concern with Picard. It should be accessible, and I don't know how accessible it's going to be.
I think we forget how big Star Trek The Next Generation was at the time. It wasn't an unwatched show. In first run of syndication, it was getting 12 million viewers regularly, and it is the most syndicated show of all time. It is a cultural phenomenon. It is globally recognised, and with streaming, that's the audience you need. We can get this many in the US, we can get this many in the UK, we can get this many across Europe, we can get this many in Australia watching. So ratings-wise, that's going to be fine. Whether it's, I don't want to say this, whether it's penetrable or not to a casual audience is another question.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the Doctor Who analogy, you're talking the difference of the television movie and the first episode of the 2005 series.
Absolutely, yeah.
And both of those have jumping on points, but the TV movie in 97 has a load of stuff that is, and was, to a larger American audience, quite impenetrable. And even though people were familiar with it, there was enough in that to make you go, I don't really get what's happening. And I don't know. The under 30 audience is the thing that concerns me a little.
When Enterprise ended, it had a baseline audience of around, I think, between 2 and 3 million people. So that's basically the amount of people who will still tune in on a Friday night to watch Star Trek. That is basically how many Star Trek fans are still out there, how many dedicated Star Trek fans. Do they need that many people for a streaming show? Do Amazon Prime care if, they don't get, 4 or 5 million people streaming Star Trek Picard?
I guess we should explain. In the US, this is produced by CBS All Access. And this is designed to drive subscribers to that service. It's, not a Netflix. It's not Amazon Prime. It's one of the old networks trying to create their own streaming service in America. Discovery was sold globally to Netflix, and it was sort of like Netflix is a new home of Star Trek, and they picked up all the classic Star Trek shows, and it was sort of designed for streaming when first pitched, as an anthology show. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, and this is now going on Amazon. It's CBS All Access obviously going to the highest bidder, but is this not valuable to Netflix as well then?
You see, I think it's not necessarily going to the highest bidder. I think it's going to the most adequate bid that was way below expectations. Because Netflix were ridiculous with their bid for Discovery because they paid for the show to be made. CBS All Access essentially got Discovery for free because Netflix budgeted every single episode. So then they turn around and say, oh, that's about Star Trek Picard, you can sell that to Amazon Prime. Because if it was really valuable, if Star Trek Discovery was a massive success for Netflix, then they would be buying Picard as well. Unless they feel that with their model, they've already got the Star Trek fans, they don't need the next one.
Yeah, it would be sort of nice if it was in the same place. It feels very odd to me, but it's a different era, I guess. It's going to have a different feel. The cartoon shows, whenever they emerge, they're going to be on different places as well. So it's sort of a fractured brand, although CBS and Viacom now back together, bringing the movies in. So you've got to think that whatever they're doing on the small screen now, they're going to be setting up a movie franchise at some point, because I don't imagine the Kelvinverse is going to have another film, or if it does, it's maybe got one left in it. And then, does Discovery go on the big screen? Not a chance. Or do they go back to the familiar? Do they bring back the old characters? Do they do like a Star Trek super team like they were first proposing in the post-Nemesis world, where it would bring in characters from Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and along with the Next Generation? Yeah, that's what they'll do. Or do they set up a new show? Do they do an Enterprise show? Do they put Pike's Enterprise in the movies? There's all sorts of iterations, but there's all sorts of possibilities as well. But it requires these to be good. And, I'm a Star Trek fan. I love almost all of Star Trek. I will continue to watch Discovery despite my misgivings, because I want to know. I want to know what's happening in Star Trek. But this one kind of has to be not terrible. It has to engage, because the future of the franchise does rest on it. It's a very fragile balance between being at your peak and disappearing, which I think you saw when, you had First Contact and then the two other shows on in that era. And then very quickly, by the time of Nemesis, it's like, oh, this is dead. This is dead at this point. So it's like you can go from having all the Star Trek to having no Star Trek very, very quickly.
Well, I think that's probably a good point as well, to just address the things that we do think look promising from what we've seen. Just to avoid some of the relentless negativity, which isn't necessarily even that we're negative at times. It's more concerned from prior things like Discovery.
No, I'm just negative.
Well, the thing is that trailer is just so cliched. It has all those elements that we're familiar with, and then it is just she has no idea how powerful she is. And you're just, I'm so tired of that.
They're breaking new ground with Star Trek. First you had Star Trek Discovery. It tackled religion for the very first time in all of Star Trek. And I know that because The Guardian said so. The Guardian reviewed Star Trek Discovery, and that's the very first time it's tackled religion. And now we have this innovative new idea of a chosen one, which, you'll get the dissenters who'll say that this has happened a lot. But really, I've made a quick list, and it hasn't happened too much. All you've got is, Neo, John Connor, Benjamin Sisko, Anakin Skywalker, Buffy Summers, Frodo Baggins, Sam Winchester, Benjamin Sisko, Luke Skywalker, Jesus, Kung Fu Panda, Rick O'Connell, Jack Lucas, Angel or Spike, it's not really clear, Harry Potter, Ash Ketchum, Bilbo Baggins, Benjamin Sisko, Ray, Homer Simpson, Percy Jackson, Benjamin Sisko, River Tam, and Benjamin Sisko. But it's never been done in Star Trek before.
That's the worst thing. I think that's what I worry about. Just all these science fiction cliches being brought out of the woodwork, and Star Trek cliches. They couldn't resist him having him on a bridge going "engage" at the end, and you just go, "All right, good." But
then trailer.
Yeah, exactly. And we are massively overreacting because we're kind of nerds, and we've got a podcast to talk about it.
I enjoy taking the piss.
I genuinely think I'm more positive about it, because I don't know. I rarely take trailers at face value, and I feel like I could see what they're trying to do, which it feels like a bit like Nemesis, but not shit.
Yeah,
and even that idea of a chosen one narrative, again, it's very easy to convey that in a trailer when it's not necessarily what you're going with, because that kind of pithy line, it could just be something as simple as someone that has information. She doesn't know how important it's just the point I'm making, but it sounds good in a trailer.
You would assume basically she's some sort of super Borg that somehow escaped. That's basically all she is.
Who knows what will happen?
The ridiculous theories that I've seen for who she is were rather hilarious, including Data's daughter, Lal.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that, as I say, when that stuff ends up in trailers, which again we saw with the Star Wars stuff. People that spent 2 years going, oh, I wonder who Snoke is, and starting to develop all these grand elaborate theories of, hey, well, I read this thing in a book once, so maybe he's Darth Plagueis, and it's going to be bringing this part from Legends, it's going to be bringing this, and then that video game, I'm like, well, obviously, you know, that's canon in my head, so it's all going to play into this, and then the filmmaking thing of, no, it's actually not important to what we're doing, and then they're going, but that's not the theory I made up in my head.
Yeah. And yeah,
I must make content on YouTube. I must monetize my anger.
Hey, look, we're not monetizing this in any way. This is taking up a lot of our time and costing a lot of friendships. Discovery sort of it treads on the original series and doesn't really make any sense, but that's not really my Star Trek. Next Generation is absolutely my Star Trek, and this is the first time in a long time we're visiting that world, and I was surprised how much it looks like. Just seeing that badge again on the screen, I was just like and then the Starfleet uniforms, which look quite like the kind of Voyager uniforms, and it's just like, oh, this is pushing those buttons that the Orville pushes, and then it's just like, but the stuff around it, I'm just like,
What the hell are you doing out here, Picard? In the galaxy?
Engage.
it was Jerry Ryan gave an interview, like they all did when they were introduced, but she said she was a very specific character for 4 years on Voyager. There was a lot of growth and all of that. She went from being a machine to learning to be human, but particularly the way she moved and her voice. That's what I was really hung up on. Her voice didn't change that much in years. So when I got an initial script and I knew from the original pitch with James Duff a year and a half ago, she's not the same Seven. She's much more human. She's been on Earth for a long time. She's been through a lot. So when I saw that initial script and saw, what the hell are you doing out here? It's a very, very different voice. And that's what was freaking me out. I was literally freaking out. I was bursting into tears. I don't know what her voice is. I can't find her. And, you know, that sort of strikes me as, they've got this character in, but she's a different character. And you can accept that they change, but the actor who played them for years is sort of like, I don't recognise this. I can't actually play this the way they've written it. That makes me pause a little bit, you know.
But then again, the Star Wars analogy again, Mark Hamill did something very similar. And I fundamentally don't agree with Mark Hamill, but because he went on about it for so long, a section of the internet picked it up and went, well, Mark Hamill says it, so it must be true. And ended up actually twisting some of those words out of context. So the feeling of the actor tied to the character sometimes, I mean, for an example on that particular point, again, let's remember, for example, Mark Hamill thought at one point Luke should have a mohawk. So, you know, that was a thing. I what I mean is, I understand your concern, but I feel, especially when you're trying to move forward, and let's be perfectly frank about it, this is the first time in quite some time that the series has, and I don't just mean Picard, I mean the franchise has a chance to move forwards. It's been so hung up on slotting into bits of the past. This is the first time it has a chance to move forwards, and yeah, absolutely, it will pick up on stuff from the past to do that as a springboard, but it has a chance to do something interesting, and that will tread on some toes in doing it, but it should absolutely seize that chance if it's there.
But I don't think that that's Andrew's concern, and it's not my concern with it, because Seven of Nine was a character who progressed throughout season 4 to 7 of Voyager. She grew as a character, and she made those little steps to become a bit more human, in the same way Data does throughout Next Generation. And she was a great character for it. And the idea that she is now a lot more human, as you know, she becomes far less Borg over time, as you would expect, that makes sense. The problem is you've got Jerry Ryan in tears because nobody is directing her on how she should be playing the part.
Again, though, Mark Hamill turning up on set and saying to the director, I fundamentally disagree with everything you've done with my character. Whereas I watch that film and I think, that is the logical progression, because it's not interesting to have a completely infallible character. Not saying that compares with what we're talking about here. I'm just saying,
but
the actors' hang-ups are not necessarily the audience's.
But no, the point is that they should have said, "Oh, hey, Jerry, this is what the character is like now, so you need to pitch it in this way," rather than just saying, "Here's the script."
There's always the potential that there could be better direction, but it doesn't necessarily at this point make me concerned about the script, I suppose, is the point I should make.
And that's the point I'm making, that we expect 7 of 9 will be different, because that's the whole point of her character. If she arrived and she was exactly like she was in season 7 of Voyager, that would be stupid. That would piss people off, because it would be all that progression in Voyager for nothing. And she was the only character, along with the Doctor, who actually did have some character development on Voyager.
I think ultimately we have to wait and see. The fact that they kept on going on, and Patrick Stewart as well went on about this being a psychological exploration of a character, and then that trailer comes out. But that's what a trailer is, isn't it? Is show the explosions.
Yeah.
So we don't really know what the show is going to be, because the descriptions don't match the trailer. But maybe we should do some kind of podcast and just talk about it.
Yeah.
So, do you want to do a podcast about Star Trek Picard next year?
No. Christ, no.
Shall we do one anyway?
Oh, go on then.
I guess I've got to use the Amazon Prime subscription for something.
So join us in 2020 for a brand new podcast from thespoilers.com.
We promise that series will be complete in 2020.
It will. We will be there the day after every episode comes out with a slightly less polished version of the podcast than you're probably used to. Not that you noticed.
Are you sure you want to make that commitment?
Nope. Anyway.
Sometime in the week following.
Insert podcast name here.
Will be on iTunes, Spotify, and all good subscription services. But join us again soon for another First Contact. We promise to finish season 4 before the next 2 years. Goodbye.
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 Anyone want to do a Star Trek Picard podcast?
Does that mean if I absolutely hate it that I'm going to have to continue watching it just to do the podcast?
Yeah, but that would be fun.
Can we do a Twin Peaks Season 3 podcast?
No. We have to talk about Star Trek for the rest of our lives.